If you didn't hear that, you probably don't need to. Just saying. So we good to go? Awesome. So let's give it up for Lyza.
So, good morning. Afternoon. I've actually lost track. I was so bowled over by the last presentation. I lost my ability to think critically. Let's just do it. I have a goal with this presentation. I'm going to try to get through the whole thing without saying the word performant. It's really hard. And I have to actually be clicking on my presentation. This is more challenging than it looks. Alrighty, rock on. I'm a web developer. That may not be an amazingly impressive thing to say, but it's relevant. I'm also a co-founder at Cloud4, and at Cloud4 we make websites and applications for mobile devices and other various platforms. So our focus is very intensely mobile and pan-device. We spend a lot of time trying to make things work in as many places as possible, and at the core of that philosophical, technical approach is the web. So we approach things with a web-centered filter versus reaching necessarily for native or platform-specific approaches. So I've actually known about PhoneGap and been involved with PhoneGap for several years, and when I first saw it, I was really quite taken with its notion and promotion that the web could be a unifying platform for the pan-device feature. I love that idea. And when I first knew PhoneGap, I interpreted it this way. I thought, okay, PhoneGap is choosing the web, and thus I can use the web to make mobile applications. And I love the web, so ipso facto, this is going to be really awesome. And I sort of developed this grand vision. I thought it was beautiful. I integrated PhoneGap into this vision. It's a vision of the pan-device universe of the future, based on standardized web components at its core. So in my vision, it's built with standards-based web applications, consuming data from API, with all sorts of commonality and crossover, but still feeling really comfortable on various devices and platforms. And because I'm a web dev, I love the idea that I could continue developing primarily within the browser. And in my beautiful final vision, you would end up with a product that runs both in the browser and on the target devices natively that you're targeting. I thought, rock on, the future is bright, things are going to be so awesome, I now have a career as an app developer. And maybe you guys have been here also, but I had just the most amazing time on my first PhoneGap project. I set things up in Xcode because everyone has an iOS device and nothing else matters. And I dropped it PhoneGap and maybe, sprinkled it with some HTML and webby goodness and a very simple plugin. Maybe I'm taking a photo with a camera, or this being a few years ago when it was harder to do, feeling very excited that I could get the location off of a device. And then I build, and it works absolutely perfectly on my iPhone 3GS. So, done. I get a gold star. I am now an application developer. Right? Okay. But in reality, the first time I'm actually faced with a real project that has real scope in PhoneGap, it's going to be used by real humans on real devices, I started having some nagging voices in the back of my head. Like what could possibly go wrong here? Maybe a totally web-centered view of things might get me into a little bit of trouble. After all, I did know intuitively that we're not going to be successful just shoving a website into a native application wrapper. And there's also these little things about how it can be a little bit difficult to work with the web. Perhaps it's okay. Blunt, bad. There are no silver bullets, these things. Okay, crap. Right. Meanwhile, at the same time, the app is growing. It's getting kind of harder to manage, and things have perhaps started going a little bit pear-shaped. I bet you saw where this was going, sure. But okay. The good news is, I've come out the other side of some of this chaos, and I'm maybe a little bit hurt, maybe I have a few psychic bruises, but maybe I can help you have a slightly smoother ride. If you're a web developer who's just moving into PhoneGap, who's ready to embark on these adventures, here are some areas you may want to wear just a bit of extra padding as you go forward. So we all have, as web developers, we have certain ways of thinking about the way the web works. And I'm not talking about individual web standards, I'm talking about the way they sort of orchestrate and tick. And you'll find as you move into native context that sometimes these patterns are skewed or completely backwards or just don't quite fit And there are things that we have to adjust our way of thinking. And it also, as web developers, we tend to fight platform specificity. It's in our natures, right? But in reality, as we move into this world, we're on a device and we are in a native context. And we're now beholden to certain patterns that we may not be used to. And that's the reality. I've always been sort of attached to my have text editor will travel, like environment-free form of development. And it's been difficult for me to face that in this world, a text editor is not going to get me all the way there. I had to buckle down and face the reality that I needed to understand my components and my build tools. And it was difficult for me because as a web developer, I don't like that kind of detail, but I found that not getting out in front of it could tend to be fatal in my projects, so that was dangerous. And it's probably really self-evident to you at this point that all of this stuff compounds as your app gets bigger and actually does real things and is no longer just a hello world app. So we hear that with PhoneGap, anyone who's a web developer can make an application, but should we? Is that really true? Is this possible? So I think that there's a few ways for us to sort of defend ourselves a little bit as we move into this. And one of those things is rethinking a few of these web concepts I at least had long since considered settled. A good example of one of the things that blindsided me substantially involved how I thought of the web and how it worked from its very center. I see the web as a combination of internet protocols, the HTTP protocol, with a user agent slapped on the front of all of that, right? And at the middle of that, we've got our friend HTTP, which by its nature is the stateless protocol, right? Except that now that we're inside the application, we have a situation where we've got a bona fide life cycle. And now we have all of this state that we have to manage that doesn't go away. And that, for web developers, can be very challenging to face. I mean, I was brought up to understand web interactions as a discrete series of stateless request-response cycles that gave me the understanding that I was working with a fresh environment all the time. Now, I recognize that this is a very 1990s way of explaining things, and I do understand how these things work in the modern world, and I have long since started disabusing myself of the simplicity of that notion. But what I didn't realize going into this PhoneGap world is just how intensified that the notion of state is when you have a long-running native application context. So I did actually think I sort of got it, but I was wrong. I still screwed it up the first couple of times. It became fairly obvious that it wasn't going well at a certain point in the app as it got more and more complex, and I felt like I was putting my finger in the dike in various ways to try to make the navigation work, to try to make state work, to try to make history work, and it felt all wrong, so I started doing some Googling and came across this article by a guy named Derek Bailey. I was using Backbone for this app, and he said in this article, like, please, you idiots, stop using Backbone as if it were a stateless web server. And I was like, wait, but what is he talking about? And I was like, oh. And then I started thinking about it, and I had this epiphany, and it really helped. I was thinking about, history and managing that, and, I knew my history API, but that on its own wasn't quite enough. I needed to understand that there were two different things I was trying to do here. I'm so attached to the web world where you have everything's URL addressable, right? You want to have this state in your application that you can come back to as bookmarked or however that is a URL state. But what I didn't really put together at first is that I can keep pushing those URL addressable states into the history without actually going all the way through and following through necessarily on routing and requests for that, and divorcing those two concepts, even though it's sort of subtle, was a big step forward for me. And now, as I'm designing these things, I sit down and I try to think through my application and its life cycle, because it can get pretty long in the tooth, right? We're not getting page refreshes all the time. You can tell it even just hints from these PhoneGap events that things aren't going away; they're just merely kind of going to the background and coming back again. And you really don't get the same kind of do-over you do in a web page and the good old reload button. Things really stick around, and you need to keep that in your mind. And we also have to recalibrate about the way we're thinking about data and the client. I grew up in a time when I was but a wee lad. Client applications were pretty helpless, right? They didn't have their own sense of what things look like, and they're very much beholden to the API to say, here's what this is, and here's some more information. And without that connection, they were lonely and useless. But they've now made it into their rowdy teens, and they have a bit of an attitude and a lip. And they have, in a lot of cases, a pretty good sense of what things look like, and may even be manipulating those things or changing those things, and then saying, "Here, you deal with it. I have to make some changes." It's done. So the reality is, you're probably going to be rendering data in your apps, which involves caching and syncing and having a meaningful offline mode. So with caching, I tend to make it a default, like rule of thumb, to just stuff things away locally as I'm syncing them from remote, of course, within reason. Okay, I don't mind using local storage for this. I actually find it quite useful. What? Why? I mean, like, everyone's meeting on local storage, but like, really, it's so simple. And I understand that I can't depend on it necessarily, but it's so simple, and it's sort of like falling off of a log, and like, I just, okay, if you're way more sophisticated than me and more advanced and want to do more clever stuff with more stuff, there's other stuff out there for you. But hey, I find that just stuffing stuff into local storage never really hurt anyone. Okay, so then you've got your local data. Maybe you're doing some things in the client without a connection, independently, whether you're offline or whatever. Now you've got some dirty models, and trying to make this work and get it synced over and make it all clean. Let's pretend you're not using something magical like parse that we heard about earlier. That problem is non-trivial, and I tend to leave it to the people who are smarter than me. So, I'll use, if I'm using backbone, I'll use something like dual storage, which lets me stuff into local storage automatically as I'm getting it from remote. And dual storage works well for me specifically because it models sort of the RESTful resource routes. Its local storage keys are exactly what the remote request would be. And that makes it kind of easier and less chaotic. And if all this just makes you really like, oh my god, what? Just using local storage or whatever your local data solution is for just read-only stuff, that's fine. And then if you're doing all of this, I find that offline mode has been coming more and more naturally because you've already got that data locally. And it just sort of follows naturally. I should mention some PhoneGap things since we're at PhoneGap Day. But there's a few events here that could help you out if you're into that sort of thing. And just one moment of silence. This is the one web thing that I'm still having trouble getting over, is sort of the decreasing relevance of the actual HTML document. And I just need to get into a 12-step program for that or something, but onward. So we'll just move on. So now we're inside a native application. What does it look like from in here? And the reality, I don't love it because now we're no longer protected from, we're not in this sort of universal generic browser Chrome. Now we actually have to care about what things look like. And one of the things that just tends to drive me completely bananas in the application space is navigation, because it's no longer just up, down, left, right. It's all these things going on. In a lot of cases, I have to keep track of where people are going or have been in different ways, and it sort of ties into state. And it can just get sort of baffling. So I urge you to sort of think through this a little bit before you go into development if you're used to a more traditional web situation. Again, we're not safe anymore inside of that universal and generic browser Chrome. We suddenly have to care about an entire long list of device and platform specifics to get our jobs done. We have to care about the interface. And here's just one random example of one of the random pieces of completely useless bullshit you need to know about to get your job done. I'm just going to talk briefly about keyboards because it's just this one little thing, but then all of a sudden it's as a software R keyboard, and how do I trigger it, and how do I get the right keyboard, and how do I make it go away again, and how big is it, and is it in my way, and how do you wire up that little soft button to submit the form you're currently working with anyway? Yeah. And then if you get beyond the specifics, you're still dealing with this list. Okay, it's as the developer, you're going to want to, maybe you want to get rid of those 300 millisecond click delays using the fast click library. Maybe you want to make it behave more iOS-y by making tapping on the status bar scroll the whole thing up. And if you hate third-party social authentication like I do, finding the right plugins to make that look right and feel right, all that stuff. But the good news is, about this crap is you can usually Google for it. This stuff's details. You do not need to devote your life to becoming to total mastery of the BlackBerry submit button, right? You can just go look it up. But there's also lower level concerns, right? Which is A freak out for me, because I've always seen myself as a rather slow and high-level person. I swear to God, I actually posted this as my personal career description on a personal ad in 2001. So we have these lower-level concerns, and we have these longer-running native apps on mobile hardware, which emphasizes the need for us to be good software developers, frankly, and paying attention to our memory use, knowing how to profile our apps and what the results actually mean, and not making stuff blow up being the ultimate goal, right? The bad news about this stuff is that you can't usually Google for it. This is stuff that you need to be good at. You need to know how to do software design. So if we put all this together, these little bits and things I've been talking about, and we have these slight metaphorical shifts. We've got non-linear navigation, we've got state management, we've got a certain amount of interface context we need to deal with. Remember I mentioned keyboards and tap delay acceleration, and managing our memory and making sure things don't go kaboof. Now, I have a quick video for you of an application we've been working on in Cloud 4 recently that we're quite excited about called Crush, which is a social app for writing about the wines you've tried. And this little video shows all of these things happening at once. It's very quick, so I'll try to keep up with it. Are you ready? Okay. So I'm now on the home screen of this application. I'm going to go into the Add Wine section, which is the main part of the app, so I can add a wine. And now at the top of that section, I'm going to search, but when I submit the search, I'm going to use the wired-in soft keyboard instead of the interface button there. And then I'm going to continue drilling down and refining my search into this section, so I find the wine that I actually want to post about. And then I realize as I find it that I think I might have already posted about this wine, so I go back to my home screen, and now I'm going back to the section I was in. It remembers where I was, but then I think, gosh, I don't actually want to post about this, and I tap that button again, and I'm at the top again. So what's going on is a bunch of non-linear navigation and state management that is definitely different than what I've had to deal with before in just sort of what we call the stock web sort of way of developing. So you actually need to care about your processes, components, and tools. Getting detail-oriented, the whole world has changed, of course, with the PhoneGap command line interface we heard about this morning, but it's still necessary for you to deal with a lot of minutiae. You know, so I would it's just like very much not my thing, frankly, you know, but if you are not a detail-oriented person, you're going to have to buckle down and scale up a little bit, because if you don't in front of this stuff, you're going to make yourself crazy. And one of the things that helps me keep on top of this is that I do use the browser as a touchstone. I will go out of my way to make certain features in my app work in browser even if I don't need to deliver on that, so that I can keep my workflow and processes sane. I mean, that might sound a little bit pedantic, but it gives you a rather nice set of benefits. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I really, really love like save, reload, save, reload. It's a lot faster than building a device or even an emulator. And it helps me keep honest about what I'm doing with core web and standards, like focus on that. It makes it easier for other sort of distributed teammates to contribute to the project. Those teammates may not be working in a native sort of development context, and it's easier for them to participate. And I absolutely, absolutely, absolutely hate debugging on the device. So anything I can do to start in the browser, it just makes my life so much better. So again, maximize what you do in the browser, minimize what only works on device or in emulator. And then I use PhoneGap I feature detect and then use PhoneGap to enhance, just like the way my mom taught me about progressive enhancement. So, you know, you guys probably have thought of this before, but you know, the notion of PhoneGap is progressive enhancement, just like our other web tools, right? If you can, you know, just enhance right up. So my setup currently, because I figure people are going to ask, it's like these first three things. It's just text editor or browser, application framework and code. If you want more details, you can ask me later. And I'm running a local web server for development tasks. Node if you care, but anyway. And then for other stuff, when I need to do them periodically, we have simple scripts to build to either emulator or to device, and then we distribute it if needed. But these first three things happen automatically whenever I save a file, right? So that's easy. And then the last couple steps I just need to do whenever I actually need to build a device or distribute. So putting this all together, for those of you about to embark on PhoneGap adventure who are maybe in the web space now, watch for web concepts that are going to apply a little bit differently in the native application world. Just keep that in mind. Put your workflow first, even though it's tedious. Get that sorted out. Don't screw yourself later. Stay in a browser whenever you can. And sort of secondarily to that, try approaching PhoneGap a little bit as a progressive enhancement technique. But do remember that nothing works until you see it on device. And that goes probably without saying. And you do need to be now aware of specific platform-specific context. But all these buzzwords become part of your life. But my biggest recommendation of all to you guys as you're going into this is just give yourself some time and be gentle to yourself, because there is an adjustment thing. You're not just jumping from a website into a magically perfect, simple application. There's things to learn and things to stumble over, frankly. But you can totally do this. Web techniques and web standards can build these native apps, and I think that it's really exciting, and I hope you guys have fun with it.